Hello and welcome to our video on the American Civil War and Reconstruction. This period of American history is often romanticized in popular culture, but the reality is far more complex and sobering. Today, we'll explore the events leading up to the war itself, and the aftermath of Reconstruction. Let's start with the common misconception that the Civil War was fought solely over slavery. While slavery was undoubtedly a major issue, it was not the only one. There were several economic, political, and social factors that contributed to the outbreak of war. One of the main economic factors was the North's increasing industrialization, which led to a shift towards wage labor and away from the plantation economy of the South. This put the two regions at odds, as the South relied heavily on slave labor to maintain its agricultural-based economy. There were also political factors at play, such as the debate over states' rights versus federal power. The South believed that states had the right to secede from the Union if they so chose, while the North believed that the federal government had the power to prevent secession. Lastly, there were social factors, including cultural differences between the North and South. These differences were rooted in the region's differing histories, traditions, and beliefs. Now let's move on to the war itself. One myth about the Civil War is that it was a quick and decisive conflict. In reality, it was a long and bloody struggle that lasted from 1861 to 1865. The war was fought on several fronts, with major battles taking place in places like Gettysburg, Antietam, and Bull Run. The North had the advantage of greater resources, including manpower, industrial capacity, and infrastructure. However, the South had superior military leadership and a more defensive strategy. In the end, the North emerged victorious, thanks in large part to the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln and the Union Army's military commanders. The war claimed the lives of over 620,000 Americans, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in American history. Finally, let's talk about Reconstruction, the period following the war in which the country sought to rebuild and reunite. One myth about Reconstruction is that it was a time of equality and progress for African Americans. In reality, Reconstruction was a difficult and often violent period marked by resistance from Southern whites. One of the key goals of Reconstruction was to ensure that African Americans were granted the same rights and protections as white Americans. This led to the passage of several important laws, including the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. However, these laws were often ignored or actively resisted by white Southerners, who sought to maintain their control over society. This resistance took the form of violence, intimidation, and the passage of restrictive laws like the Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation. It wasn't until the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s that African Americans were able to make significant strides towards equality. In conclusion, the American Civil War and Reconstruction were complex and difficult periods in American history. While there are many myths and misconceptions about these events, it's important to understand the reality of what happened. By learning from our past, we can strive to create a more just and equal society for all Americans. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe.